The highway has been closed for 6 hours. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind is moving at speeds that make the air feel closer to minus 40. Somewhere along Interstate 90 in South Dakota, near a small stretch of road that has always punished winter travelers, dozens of 18-wheelers sit perfectly still in a truck stop parking lot. Their engines are off. Their cargo is waiting, and inside each of those sleeper cabs, somewhere behind thick curtains and insulated walls, a professional driver is trying to figure out how to survive the next 72 hours. Most people, when they hear a blizzard is coming, do something entirely reasonable. They check the weather. They cancel their plans. They stay home. But truck drivers often do not have that option. The calendar does not pause for weather. The customer waiting for a delivery does not pause. The perishable cargo already loaded in a refrigerated trailer does not pause. And so, instead of staying home, thousands of drivers across the Great Plains make a different calculation every single winter. They try to move forward for as long as the road allows, and then they stop and wait. Inside their trucks, alone, with nothing but their skill and their equipment standing between them and a storm that does not care about anyone's schedule. In December 2022, a blizzard moved across South Dakota with a force that even experienced truckers described as unusual. Wind gusts reached 60 miles per hour. Snowfall totals in some areas surpassed 20 inches. Interstate 90 was closed. So was Interstate 29. The South Dakota Department of Transportation urged drivers to seek long-term parking immediately, which was the polite way of saying, "You are not going anywhere for a while." Dozens of drivers converged on the Coffee Cup fuel stop in Vivian, South Dakota, a town of fewer than 100 people located along State Highway 83, right where I-90 dumps traffic when the interstate becomes impassable. Between 70 and 80 trucks filled every available inch of that parking lot. The snow kept coming. Drifts built up around the trucks until they were buried to the roofline. And then those drivers waited. For 6 days. What happened inside those trucks during those 6 days is the part of the story that never quite makes it into the news coverage. The images that went viral were stunning. Trucks swallowed by white walls, the parking lot erased under feet of drifting snow. No road visible in any direction. But the images only showed the outside. They did not show what it actually takes to keep a human being alive, reasonably warm, and legally functional inside a sleeper cab when the surrounding landscape has become something unrecognizable. Here is where most people assume the truck just keeps running. The engine stays on, the heat stays on, and the driver sits there watching movies until the plows show up. And for some drivers, in some situations, that is partially true. But running a full diesel engine for 72 continuous hours carries a real cost. A loaded semi burns somewhere between 0.8 and 1 gallon of diesel per hour at idle. Over 3 days, that is somewhere between 60 and 70 gallons. An enormous amount to burn, doing nothing but keeping warm. And that is before accounting for the fact that some of those drivers were parked far from fuel pumps, buried under drifts, unable to reach the pump even if they had wanted to. The Coffee Cup fuel stop was receiving emergency calls from trucks stuck 60 miles away. The fuel was there. The drivers were there. But the storm had made the distance between those two things effectively infinite. This is the problem that most people watching from the outside never think about, because it requires knowing something that takes years on the road to fully understand. Heat in a parked truck during a serious blizzard is not a simple question of whether the engine is running. It is a systems problem involving fuel capacity, engine wear, local idling regulations, and the specific equipment that particular truck happens to carry. And the answer looks different for every driver parked in that lot. Modern sleeper cabs are not what most people imagine. The largest of them, the kind that long-haul drivers who spend weeks at a time on the road consider home, can have up to 70 square feet of living space. There are bunks with real mattresses. There are storage compartments built into every available surface. There are small refrigerators, microwave ovens, and in many trucks, a separate climate system entirely disconnected from the main engine. That last piece of equipment is the one that matters most during a storm like this. It is called an auxiliary power unit, and understanding what it does is the key to understanding how drivers actually survive extended blizzards without burning through every gallon of fuel they carry. An APU is essentially a miniature generator and HVAC system installed directly on the truck. It runs on the same diesel fuel as the main engine, but at a fraction of the consumption rate. While the main engine idles at up to 1 gallon per hour, a diesel APU typically consumes between 0.1 and 0.5 gallons per hour, depending on outside temperature and the load it is running. Over a 3-day storm, that difference is the difference between burning 65 gallons of fuel and burning perhaps 18. The APU keeps the sleeper cab warm, charges the batteries, and powers the outlets, the driver's CPAP machine, phone charger, small refrigerator. It provides what the industry calls hotel loads, everything a person needs to live inside a small space without the main engine running at all. But not every truck has an APU. Older trucks frequently rely on a simpler device called a bunk heater, a standalone fuel-operated heater that draws from the main tank and pushes warm air into the sleeper berth. The Webasto AirTop 2000 STC, one of the most widely used models, burns approximately 1 gallon of diesel every 22 hours. Remarkable efficiency compared to idling the main engine. But bunk heaters only provide heat. They do not generate electricity. They do not run air conditioning. And in a storm where temperatures are dropping into single digits, the difference between a warm berth and a truly habitable space becomes a matter of preparation the driver either made or did not. The drivers who managed those 6 days best were the ones who treated the stop not as a delay, but as a transition. They had done the mental work before they ever left the highway. They had watched weather radio. They had checked the South Dakota Department of Transportation's real-time road condition system, one of the more sophisticated in the country, watching for closure alerts and camera feeds along every major route in the state. They had already calculated their fuel situation. They had food in the cab, not something picked up impulsively at a counter, but the kind of food a long-haul driver maintains as a matter of discipline. The time to prepare for being stranded is not when you are stranded. It is 300 miles before that, at the last fuel stop where everything is still normal and the storm is still just a forecast. There is another threat most people would never think of, because it sounds like something that happens to machinery rather than to a person. But it matters more than almost anything else in severe cold. Diesel fuel, the same fuel that powers the engine and the APU and the bunk heater, begins to change when temperatures fall far enough. Diesel contains paraffin wax, the same type of wax used in candles, and that wax stays liquid under normal conditions. But as temperatures drop, the wax starts to crystallize. At around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, the fuel clouds over, the first visible sign of trouble. By 10 to 15 degrees, the crystals multiply and thicken until the fuel reaches what engineers call the gel point. The temperature at which it stops flowing clogs the filters and can shut down the engine entirely. In a blizzard with temperatures dropping into single digits, that is not a theoretical possibility. It is a clock ticking in the fuel tank. Experienced drivers treat their fuel before they ever reach those temperatures. Anti-gel additives, chemical formulations that modify the wax crystals as they form, keeping them small enough to pass through filters, are standard winter preparation for anyone running routes through the northern states. Some drivers also blend their fuel, mixing number 2 diesel with number 1 diesel or kerosene to lower the gel point. Fuel distributors in the northern states produce seasonal winter blends formulated for cold weather. But a driver coming from a warmer region who filled up in Kansas before heading north may have number 2 diesel in their tanks that was never treated, sitting in a South Dakota parking lot, watching the temperature drop past the point where that fuel starts to change. The storm does not care where you filled up. Sleeping, actually sleeping, not just staying warm, is its own challenge inside a blizzard-bound truck. A sleeper cab in a heavy storm is not a quiet place. Wind moves around the curved surfaces of a cab in ways that produce a constant, low-frequency sound. Refrigerated trailers have their own diesel-powered temperature control units that cycle on and off continuously. And in a crowded parking lot surrounded by dozens of trucks, a driver might be within 50 feet of 3 or 4 of those units running simultaneously. The APU makes noise. The bunk heater makes noise. The drifting snow hitting the windows makes noise. Long-haul drivers develop a form of sleep adaptation over years that is genuinely different from what most people experience in a bedroom. They learn to sleep in shorter cycles, to manage rest in irregular chunks. The Federal Hours of Service rules, maintained by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, include an adverse conditions exception that can extend a driver's available drive time by 2 hours when weather deteriorates unexpectedly. But when the road itself is closed, that calculation disappears entirely. The driver is not in an adverse driving condition. The driver is simply parked. The clock stops. The only job is to wait. What drivers do during that waiting is more human than the situation might suggest. The ones who have been through it before develop routines. They check weather updates every few hours, reading National Weather Service alerts, watching DOT camera feeds, looking for any sign of the storm easing. They eat on something approaching a normal schedule, because a person who has not eaten a real meal in 18 hours is not going to be in good condition to drive the moment the plows come through. They sleep when they can, even if the sleep is imperfect. Some walk between trucks during lulls in the wind, checking on neighbors, sharing information about fuel levels and road conditions. That informal network, driver to driver, cab to cab, passing information through handheld radios and CB channels, is older than any of the digital infrastructure surrounding it. And in situations like this, it still works better than almost anything else. The financial reality running underneath all of this rarely gets discussed. Many truck drivers are paid by the mile, which means every hour parked in Vivian is an hour of no income against fixed expenses that keep running regardless of the weather. A driver sitting still for 6 days while their cargo waits and their fixed costs accumulate is absorbing a loss that their rate per mile never accounted for. That is the quiet weight underneath every parked truck in every storm. When the roads finally opened, when the plows had done their work, and the South Dakota DOT issued clearance, and the coffee cup brought in heavy equipment to dig trucks out of the drifts, something telling happened. The drivers who came out of those cabs were not broken. They were not overwhelmed. They checked their tires, warmed their engines fully, cleared mirrors and lights, and pulled back onto a highway that was still cold and still demanding. The transition from being stranded to being operational was not a recovery. It was a resumption, something professionals do without ceremony, because the road is open and the cargo is still waiting, and that has always been the shape of the job. That is the part of trucking that almost never makes it into the conversation. Not the equipment, not the regulations, not the fuel management, but the particular mental posture of a person who has trained themselves over years and thousands of miles to absorb uncertainty without being undone by it. To sit inside a small space during a dangerous storm and remain fundamentally competent. To rest when rest is possible, eat when eating is possible, and be ready when ready is required. The next time you drive past a truck stop during a storm and see a row of rigs sitting in the dark with their lights off, remember that those trucks are not abandoned. Someone is inside each of them, managing a situation that most people will never think about until the shelves they shop from are empty. The world keeps moving because certain people have learned, over long years and difficult nights, how to wait. If a 3-day blizzard tests the limits of what a driver can manage from inside a cab, imagine what happens when the threat is not cold and stillness, but fire, moving at 40 miles per hour across a landscape with no exit. That is the situation wildfire season creates for truck drivers on the roads of the American West. and it demands a completely different kind of decision-making than any blizzard ever could.